Last month, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stepped up to a podium in New Delhi.
Right.
And he was there to deliver what was supposed to be this, this really heavy, consequential geopolitical speech.
The big stuff.
Yeah, exactly. The room is packed with diplomats, foreign correspondents, military attachés.
Oh, yeah. High pressure.
Super high pressure.
Yeah.
And his itinerary was totally loaded with these monumental topics. We're talking global hegemony, sanctions, strategic military aid.
Right.
So he gets to the microphone, right? He speaks for, I don't know, a few moments. And then he just stops.
He just cuts it off.
Completely. He looks out at this crowd of high-level dignitaries, literally abandons his script, and just says, "It is simply too hot." I'm going to make a long story short.
Wow.
Yeah. He cut the speech, altered his entire diplomatic itinerary, and basically just retreated. A major geopolitical event, just totally derailed by the weather.
Which is, I mean, it's such a striking visual, right, of the limits of human power. Because Rubio gets to, pat his pockets, climb back into an air-conditioned motorcade, board a climate-controlled private jet, and fly right back to Washington, D.C.
You can escape.
Exactly. And the really pressing question from the sources we're unpacking today is, well, what happens to the 1.4 billion people living there who cannot just get on a plane and leave?
And the numbers detailing this reality, they are just staggering. I mean, we are looking at late April and May with temperatures crossing 46 degrees Celsius across just massive swaths of the subcontinent.
Yeah, it's brutal.
To put that in perspective for you, the listener, on April 25th of this year, out of the 100 hottest cities on the entire planet,
the stat is wild.
98 of them were in India.
98 out of 100.
Not a dozen, not half, 98, and the remaining 2. They were right next door in Pakistan.
Right.
So India wasn't just topping the global heat chart. India was the entire chart.
Literally monopolizing the heat.
Yeah. And in the capital, in New Delhi, surface temperatures, meaning, the actual ground you're walking on, hits 65 degrees Celsius.
That's 149 degrees Fahrenheit, just on the pavement.
Which is hot enough that the asphalt was physically softening, like pulling into these sticky strings like melted cheese.
Oh, my God.
Adhering to people's shoes. And it was actually causing vehicle tires to blow out just from the thermal stress.
And, the climate science data we are reviewing for this deep dive, it frames this not as some freak anomaly. It's a preview of a permanent reality.
Right.
We are looking at a heat wave so severe it is actively rewriting the basic rules of human survival. The data indicates that fossil fuel emissions and the resulting shift in our global climate made this specific extreme heat event 45 times more likely to occur.
45 times? That's not a small margin.
No, not at all. South Asia is rapidly approaching environmental conditions that were, frankly, practically impossible just a century ago.
Which brings us to the core mission of this deep dive today, because we are unpacking a cascading systemic failure.
A total collapse.
Exactly. We're going to look at the incredibly specific atmospheric physics of how extreme geography creates this inescapable heat dome.
Right.
And then we'll examine the terrifying biology of how that exact heat breaks the hard limits of the human body, forcing your organs to shut down.
It's terrifying.
It really is. And from there, we'll explore how this thermal load shatters a modern nation's physical infrastructure. We're talking melting down power grids, drying up water supplies.
The grids just can't handle it.
And finally, we'll look at the geopolitical earthquake this triggers, which is one of the largest mass migrations in human history, as tens of millions of people move toward the only place left with water.
We are pulling from a deeply fascinating stack of sources today.
We really are.
I mean, we have atmospheric thermodynamics data, we have on-the-ground infrastructure analysis, high-level geopolitical strategy documents, and woven together, they map out exactly what happens when the literal foundation of a civilization is pushed past the boiling point.
So let's start with the physical reality of the geography, because to understand why people are trapped, you really have to understand the trap itself, right?
Right. You have to look at the map.
Yeah, it isn't just bad luck that India is experiencing this.
Yeah.
Our sources describe the geography of the Indian subcontinent as essentially this giant steamer pot.
It's the perfect analogy. If you look at a topographical map, the region is boxed in by 4 immense natural walls, and they create the absolute perfect conditions for trapping and compounding heat.
Okay, let's unpack this. Start with the north.
So in the north, you have the Himalayas.
Right.
This is a mountain range averaging over 6,000 meters in altitude. Now, for nations to the north of that, like China, the northern slopes of the Himalayas act as this natural air conditioner.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, cold air from Siberia rolls down into the Tibetan Plateau. But for India, which is located on the southern slopes, that massive 6,000-meter wall completely blocks any of that cool Siberian air from penetrating south.
So not a single breeze can get over that ridge.
Not one. The north is just sealed completely shut.
Wow. And then to the west, you don't just have a wall, you actually have an active heat engine.
Right, the Thar Desert. It
Yeah.
sits on the northwestern border and acts as this all-weather thermal generator. It's constantly blowing incredibly dry, hyperheated winds eastward, directly into the densely populated Indian subcontinent.
So cold is blocked to the north, and a furnace is blasting from the west.
Exactly.
And then you look to the east and the south, and you basically swap that dry heat for wet heat.
Precisely. To the east, you have the Bay of Bengal, and to the south, the vast Indian Ocean.
Those are huge.
Huge. And before the cooling monsoon rains actually arrive, these massive bodies of water act like giant atmospheric pumps.
Okay, how so?
Well, they take the intense equatorial heat, evaporate millions of tons of seawater, and then push that incredibly dense, wet, hot moisture inland.
Oh, wow. So it's literally a steamer.
Literally.
You have the Ganges Plain acting as the flat bottom of this pot, this massive expanse of low-lying land where over 1 billion people live. Cold air is blocked from the north, dry furnace heat blasts from the west, and suffocating wet heat pumps in from the east and south.
And those mountains in the north act as a one-way mirror, bouncing all that thermal energy back down.
That is just, it's a terrifying setup.
It is. And that geographical trap is the prerequisite for the meteorological event that acts as the lid on the pot, which is the high-pressure weather system known as the heat dome.
Right, the heat dome. We hear that term thrown around on the evening news all the time,
Yeah.
usually just as a synonym for like, it's going to be really hot this week.
Yeah, the media uses it pretty loosely.
Exactly. But the atmospheric mechanics detailed in our sources
Mm.
are genuinely alarming. Like, this isn't just a passive blanket of warm air.
No, not at all. It's a massive, oppressive block of high-pressure air. It just parks itself over the continent and actively changes the physics of the local atmosphere.
Explain that, because it's wild.
So, a high-pressure system is essentially a column of air pushing down heavily toward the Earth. Because the pressure is so immense, it physically traps the existing hot air near the surface.
So it can't escape.
Right. It prevents it from rising, cooling, and dissipating into the upper atmosphere. Furthermore, that downward pressure completely suppresses cloud formation.
Wait, really? It stops clouds?
Yes, if air can't rise, moisture can't condense into clouds. Zero clouds means zero shade, and zero chance of rain.
Oh, man.
The sun beats down relentlessly, entirely unobstructed, for up to 14 hours a day. The ground absorbs a staggering amount of solar radiation.
Then at night.
At night, instead of cooling off, the ground just radiates that heat back into that trapped air layer.
But the most terrifying mechanism of the heat dome, and this blew my mind in the sources, isn't that it traps heat, it's that it generates its own heat out of thin air.
Yes, adiabatic heating.
Talk about that.
This is a fundamental law of thermodynamics. As that massive dome of high-pressure air sinks toward the Earth, the increasing atmospheric pressure causes the air mass to compress. Okay.
When gases compress, the kinetic energy of their molecules increases, and that translates directly to higher temperatures.
Right.
The sources highlight the math on this, which is crazy. For every 1,000 meters this column of air drops, its temperature automatically rises by 10 degrees Celsius.
Which means it doesn't even need extra sunlight to do this.
No solar radiation required. The physical squashing of the air itself generates the heat.
That is insane.
It becomes a self-fueling cycle. The hotter the air gets, the more the pressure builds. The higher the pressure, the more it pushes down. And the more it pushes down, the more it compresses and heats up again.
So it's like this heavy, invisible hydraulic press of heat.
Exactly. A hydraulic press.
And the visceral reality of living inside that hydraulic press is just hard to fathom. Like, the text points to Phalodi, this city in the state of Rajasthan.
Right.
Back in 2016, they hit 51 degrees Celsius, which still stands as the highest temperature ever recorded in Asia. But this year, they broke the 50-degree mark again.
And not just for an afternoon spike. Right. They sat above 50 degrees for a full week.
Just relentless.
And there was this footage circulating from the region of camels collapsing on the asphalt highways. And when you think about the biological evolution of a camel...
They built for this.
Exactly. They've spent millions of years adapting to survive the harshest, most blistering deserts on Earth. They've specialized foot pads designed to walk on scorching sand.
Right.
Yet, these animals were collapsing on the highways because the 65-degree surface temperature of the asphalt was literally burning their legs so badly they couldn't stand back up.
It's horrific.
It really is. And if an animal specifically evolved for extreme thermal endurance is burning alive on the street, human biology is just hopelessly outmatched.
Which is why we have to move from the physics of the atmosphere into the biology of the human body to really understand exactly why the mortality rate spikes so aggressively.
Right. The precise mechanism of how heat kills. I think the natural instinct for you listening to this might be to compare it to your own experiences, right? Like you might think, okay, 50 degrees Celsius is around 122 degrees Fahrenheit. I've been in a dry sauna that was 160 degrees, and I sat there for 20 minutes and felt fine.
Right. People make that comparison all the time.
But the sources introduce a metric that fundamentally changes the math of human survival here. We have to stop talking about the dry bulb temperature and start looking at the wet bulb temperature.
This is the crucial distinction. When you hear a standard weather forecast, you are usually hearing the dry bulb temperature. It is a simple measurement of ambient kinetic heat in the air.
Okay.
The wet bulb temperature, however, measures the ambient heat combined with the relative humidity. It calculates the joint lethality to the human body by measuring the air's capacity to absorb moisture.
Let's break down why the humidity is the actual killer here. Because sweating is our body's primary and really only natural defense mechanism against overheating, right?
Yes. Human thermoregulation is this elegant, highly effective biological air conditioner. But it relies entirely on the physics of evaporation.
Right.
When your core temperature rises, your body pumps water and salt to the surface of your skin.
Sweat.
Exactly. And as that sweat evaporates from a liquid state into a gaseous state, it requires energy. It pulls that thermal energy, that heat, directly out of your body and carries it away into the atmosphere.
So it's the phase change that cools you, not just the water on your skin.
Correct. But that cooling mechanism requires the atmosphere to actually accept the water.
And there's a limit.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The atmosphere can only hold so much water vapor at any given time. If the air is highly humid, meaning it is nearing saturation, the vapor pressure of the air equals the vapor pressure of your sweat.
So what happens?
Physics dictates that evaporation must slow down, and eventually it stops completely. Your sweat just pools on your skin. You are drenched, but there is no phase change from liquid to gas.
So your core temperature stops dropping.
It stops dropping, and then it starts climbing.
Yeah.
Your body becomes a boiler with a blocked exhaust valve. You are continually producing internal metabolic heat and absorbing external ambient heat, but you have absolutely zero biological mechanism to release it.
That is a terrifying image. A boiler with a blocked exhaust valve.
It's exactly what's happening.
The sources provide the example of Varanasi, which is a densely populated city situated right on the Ganges River.
Right.
And they note that the dry air temperature might only be 42 degrees Celsius, which is hot, but...
survivable if dry.
Exactly. But because of the river and the geography, the humidity spikes to 85%. You're basically wrapped in hot cling film.
That's a good way to describe it.
And the text lays out a terrifying biological red line. Let's look at those specific thresholds they mentioned. 31 degrees and 35 degrees wet bulb.
Okay, so at a wet bulb temperature of 31 degrees Celsius, a healthy, resting adult's thermoregulation system begins to fail. Your body can no longer shed heat as fast as it is absorbing it.
So you're losing the battle at 31.
It's the beginning of a losing battle, yes. But 35 degrees wet bulb is the absolute red line of human mortality.
Wow.
To conceptualize that, a wet bulb of 35 degrees is roughly equivalent to an air temperature of 39 degrees Celsius, which is around 102 Fahrenheit at 100% humidity.
Okay.
If a human being is exposed to a 35-degree wet bulb environment without artificial cooling, a healthy adult will die within 6 hours.
See, I want to pause and push back on this a bit.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge misconception about heat stroke that we really need to clear up here.
Definitely.
When people hear die in 6 hours, they often assume we're talking about someone who is severely dehydrated, or an elderly person with a pre-existing heart condition, or someone doing intense physical labor in the sun.
Right. They think it's circumstantial.
Exactly.
Mhm.
You're saying this isn't about hydration or fitness levels.
Not at all. That is the most terrifying aspect of the wet bulb threshold. It is an impassable law of physics.
So it doesn't matter who you are.
You could be an Olympic athlete sitting completely still in the shade drinking a gallon of water an hour. It will not matter. Wow.
Past a 35-degree wet bulb temperature, if you do not have an artificial cooling source, your body's thermodynamic exhaust is blocked. Your core temperature will inevitably soar past 40 degrees Celsius or 104 Fahrenheit.
And what actually happens inside the body at that temperature? Like, why do the organs fail?
It happens at a cellular level. As the core temperature rises past 40 degrees, the proteins inside your cells begin to lose their structural integrity. It's a process called denaturing.
Denaturing.
Yeah, think about cracking a raw egg into a hot frying pan.
Okay.
The clear, liquid egg white turns into a solid, opaque white.
Right, it cooks.
That is the heat permanently unwinding the complex folded structures of the proteins. It changes their physical shape. And the exact same process begins happening to the cellular machinery inside your organs.
Your organs are literally cooking inside you.
Yes, the brain sustains damage first, which leads to confusion, delirium, and seizures.
Which means you probably can't even help yourself at that point. Exactly. Then, as the blood thickens and the cells break down, the kidneys become overwhelmed and fail, stopping blood filtration. Finally, the cardiovascular system collapses and the heart gives out.
That is awful.
It is a rapid, unavoidable biological sequence.
And the truly alarming data point from our sources is that the Ganges Plain, where hundreds of millions of people live and work, is already frequently registering wet bulb temperatures of 32 to 33 degrees.
They are agonizingly close to that absolute physiological limit.
Just a degree or two away.
And the human toll on the ground is already devastating, even when the ambient conditions are hovering just below that absolute 35-degree maximum.
Yeah, the sources highlight some deeply upsetting realities about what this looks like in practice. There's the account of a 9-month-old baby girl living in a tin roof house without a fan or air conditioning.
Right.
And she literally died from the ambient heat in the room. Her body just couldn't regulate the thermal load.
Because infants have a much harder time thermoregulating anyway.
Exactly. Or take the 2024 general election. The sources describe how, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, 33 election workers died in a single day.
A single day.
Right. And these were security guards managing the lines, cleaning staff, temporary administrative workers. They just stood out in the open sun for hours doing their jobs until they collapsed.
And many died before they could even be transported to a hospital.
33 people working a government job killed by the air they were breathing in one afternoon.
It's tragic, but we also have to critically examine the official mortality numbers being reported by the authorities, because there is a massive disconnect between the biological reality we just discussed and the bureaucratic data.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because the Indian government released figures stating that over a 2-month period, there were roughly 40,000 cases of heat stroke and 110 confirmed deaths.
Right, 110.
110 deaths across a country of 1.4 billion experiencing record heat. That seems incredibly suspiciously low.
Well, the medical journals and epidemiological experts cited in our sources state that this is a colossal undercount. They estimate the real death toll is likely 10 to 20 times higher.
Okay, but why such a massive discrepancy? How do you lose track of thousands of casualties?
You have to look at the demographics of the workforce. India relies heavily on an informal economy encompassing over 30 million outdoor laborers.
Like who?
We're talking about construction workers, rickshaw pullers, agricultural laborers, street vendors. These are populations living on the extreme margins of poverty. They do not have the luxury of checking a weather app and calling in sick.
Right, there's no paid time off for a street vendor.
Exactly. If they don't work today, their families don't eat tonight. So they are out on active construction sites, laying bricks from 5 a.m. until noon, absorbing lethal amounts of thermal radiation.
Just pushing through it until they drop.
Yes. And in vast rural agricultural districts, people collapse in the fields and pass away in their homes. They never make it to a modern medical facility.
So there's no official record.
Right. An autopsy is never performed, and heat stroke is never recorded on a death certificate. The true scale of the mortality is almost completely invisible to the official data.
It's a silent disaster.
It really is.
Now, if the human body physically cannot survive these wet bulb temperatures naturally, survival becomes entirely dependent on technology.
Right, you need a machine.
If biology fails, you have to rely on the grid. Air conditioning, fans, pumped water. But there's a cruel paradox here that the sources point out.
The infrastructure death spiral.
Exactly. The exact extreme heat that makes a population wholly reliant on physical infrastructure is the same heat that actively destroys that infrastructure.
It's the moment a severe weather event transforms into a systemic civilizational collapse. Extreme heat stresses the physical components that keep society functioning to the exact same degree it stresses biological cells.
Yeah, and there is a striking irony noted in the sources. India is the world's third largest generator of electricity. They have massive coal plants, extensive solar farms, nuclear facilities. They generate a tremendous amount of power.
They do.
And yet people are dying in roasting tin huts with no fans. So the big question is, where is all that power going?
Well, a shocking amount of it never reaches a home. The official data from the sources shows a staggering national transmission loss rate of 22.7%.
Wait, almost a quarter of the power?
Yes. For every 100 megawatts of electricity generated at a power plant, nearly a quarter of it vanishes from the grid. And in some specific regional states, that loss exceeds 50%.
That is wild. I think it's important to understand the physics of why wires fail in the heat. Like, it isn't just that the cables get droopy, right?
No, it's about resistance.
Right. As the ambient air temperature soars to 45 or 50 degrees, the copper and aluminum inside the transmission lines heat up.
Right.
And heat increases the vibrational kinetic energy of the atoms inside the metal, which physically obstructs the flow of electrons.
Which means higher electrical resistance.
Exactly. Higher resistance means the wire itself generates more heat as electricity tries to push through it. So the ambient heat causes electrical heat, which causes more resistance, which causes more heat.
It's an aggressive physical feedback loop.
Totally.
And it's not just physics bleeding the grid dry either. It's also an elaborate shadow economy. The sources detail this incredibly sophisticated commercial ecosystem of electricity theft, particularly in states like Uttar Pradesh.
I was blown away by this detail when reading the sources. It isn't just, individuals throwing a hook over a power line.
No, it's a business.
Local organized syndicates have essentially created a parallel, illegal utility company using stolen power.
It's wild.
You can literally buy a basic tier subscription from a local gang, and they will illegally hook your house up to the main grid for a few hours a day.
Right.
And if you pay for the premium tier, you get stolen power all day.
And the craziest part is their customer service.
Yes. The infrastructure is so compromised that if the actual government authorities come and cut the illegal wire, the gang's customer service team is out there the very next morning reconnecting it.
That level of systemic theft and physical degradation is indicative of a grid operating on the absolute edge of failure. When you introduce a 45-degree heat dome to a fundamentally broken grid, you trigger that death spiral.
So let's walk through the mechanics of that collapse. How does it happen?
Okay, phase 1, the temperature rises, crossing the threshold of human comfort.
Right.
Phase 2, a massive percentage of the 1.4 billion people desperately need to cool down to survive. So every single air conditioner, water cooler, and ceiling fan is turned on simultaneously.
A huge surge in demand.
Exactly. The national power demand spikes to unprecedented highs. The sources note it hit nearly 271 gigawatts in late May.
Wow.
Phase 3. The aging physical infrastructure cannot handle the thermal or electrical load, and the transformers are the critical failure point here.
Why the transformers?
Because a transformer relies on internal oil to cool its components. But when the ambient air outside the transformer is 48 degrees, the oil cannot shed heat.
Oh, because the air is just as hot as the oil.
Right. The internal insulation melts, the coils short circuit, and the transformer violently fails, sometimes literally exploding.
Which leads to?
Phase 4. The grid collapses under the strain, initiating widespread blackouts.
And the lights go out, the fans stop spinning, the factory shut down.
Which leads to Phase 5, the really deadly part. The population trapped in the blackout gets even hotter, the situation becomes biologically desperate, and the exact moment the power company manages to flick the grid back on, what happens?
Oh, the immediate surge in demand from millions of resetting AC units.
Yes, it's even more violent than before, instantly crashing the system again. It's a closed, inescapable loop.
Man. And the capital city of New Delhi, this major global metropolis and political center, has been facing daily rolling blackouts of 1 to 4 hours.
Right.
And in rural areas, it's way worse.
Yeah.
Residents are plunged into the dark for over 10 hours a day.
The human cost of this specific grid failure is devastating. The sources share the story of a young woman named Monica living in Uttar Pradesh.
The story was so hard to read.
It really was. She was 23 years old, a new mother, and her husband had managed to save money for over 6 months to buy a split air conditioning unit for their tin roof house.
Which is a huge investment for them.
Massive. They purchase it, they get it installed, it's hanging right there on the wall. But they never turned it on.
Because they couldn't afford the electricity.
Exactly. The electrical rates were simply too expensive. Running that machine for a single month would consume half of their total budget for food.
So they just had to look at it.
Right. So during this brutal 45-degree heat wave, the corrugated tin walls of her home acted like a solar oven, soaking up the radiation all day and radiating it inward all night. She couldn't sleep. Her baby was screaming from the relentless heat.
And wiping down with wet towels didn't help.
No, because the water evaporated instantly into the sweltering air. On the fourth consecutive night of this thermal torture, with no way to cool her child and no relief in sight, she used her scarf to take her own life in that room.
That is just, it's beyond heartbreaking. That air conditioner, this marvel of modern engineering designed exactly for this scenario, was just a useless, silent piece of plastic and metal on the wall.
It exposes the raw vulnerability of the population. We think of AC as ubiquitous, but less than 10% of Indian households actually possess air conditioning.
And in the vast rural stretches, it's less than 1%.
And as Monica's story illustrates, even if you acquire the machine, the grid economics and reliability often render it useless.
Furthermore, when the power grid breaks, it takes the water grid down with it immediately. Because how do you move water in a modern society? You don't carry it in buckets.
You pump it.
Right, you pump it.
And without electricity, massive municipal water pumps grind to a halt. India relies heavily on groundwater extraction to survive the dry seasons, but decades of aggressive agricultural over-extraction have left those water tables critically depleted.
So they have to pump deeper.
Exactly. When the electrical pumps stop, millions of people instantly lose access to basic drinking water. On a macro level, the sources point out that 150 major reservoirs across the country are sitting at 5-year lows.
Which creates another feedback loop, doesn't it?
It does. Low water levels mean hydroelectric power generation drops by 40%, which removes critical baseload power from the electrical grid, causing more blackouts, which stops more water pumps.
The scenes described in Bangalore are straight out of a dystopian novel. I mean, Bangalore is the Silicon Valley of India, this gleaming, massive tech hub of 14 million people driving the global digital economy.
Right.
And right now, they're surviving by relying on fleets of private water tanker trucks.
It's crazy.
The sources detail how the syndicates running these water deliveries recognize the desperation and hike their prices from 100 rupees to 250 rupees practically overnight.
Price gouging on water.
Yeah. The scarcity is so intense that these water trucks literally have to be accompanied by armed guards just to prevent desperate, thirsty crowds from rushing the vehicles and physically fighting over the hoses in the middle of the street.
And even if you manage to secure water, the safety and biological viability of that water is severely compromised by the systemic breakdown.
Which brings us to the Yamuna River in New Delhi, the starkest example of this.
Oh, this part is awful.
This river is the primary water source for tens of millions of people in the capital region. The text describes the water as relatively clear before it enters the city limits. But after running through just 22 kilometers of the urban center, the water turns completely, opaquely black.
A lethal cocktail.
It's untreated factory wastewater, heavy chemical effluent, and millions of gallons of raw domestic sewage.
And the visual evidence of this pollution provided in the sources is the phenomenon of toxic snow.
Tell them about the toxic snow.
The concentration of industrial chemicals and phosphates in the water is so high that the churning of the river generates a thick, white chemical foam that floats on the surface.
Like subs in a washing machine, but toxic.
Exactly. It sometimes piles up 2 to 3 meters high, looking exactly like snowdrifts on a black river. People are literally bathing in and drawing water from a river covered in toxic foam.
It's a closed-loop system where the coolant itself is toxic. A single river is being forced to act simultaneously as the primary drinking reservoir and the primary open sewer for a megacity.
With only a few kilometers separating the intake pipes from the outflow pipes.
It's a system functioning far beyond its design parameters.
Definitely. And when the electrical grid fails and the municipal water grid is exhausted, the very next foundational pillar to collapse is the agricultural supply chain. We are moving from urban infrastructure failure directly into environmental ruin.
Right, because if the tech hubs in the capital don't have water to drink, the rural districts certainly do not have water for the crop.
No, they don't.
The sources emphasize this massive vulnerability. Nearly 60% of all Indian farmland is entirely rain-fed.
60%.
They possess no artificial irrigation systems, no deep well pumps, no canal diversions. The farmers are completely, entirely dependent on the seasonal monsoon arriving exactly on time.
And when that monsoon is delayed by the oppressive high-pressure heat dome we talked about, the agricultural devastation is absolute and immediate.
Right.
The sources report that during this heat wave, Wheat yields in the state of Uttar Pradesh plummeted by 30%.
30% is a huge drop.
It is a catastrophic reduction in the foundational caloric staple for tens of millions of people. And when crop yields drop, market scarcity spikes, and basic food prices skyrocket. The price of onions, an absolute essential ingredient in almost every regional dish, shot up by 70%.
And the politics of onion prices in India are no joke.
Yeah.
I loved this specific historical context from the source. The price of onions actually toppled the Delhi state government back in 1998.
That's true.
It is such a foundational element of the daily diet that when it becomes unaffordable, the economic bottom falls out for the working class, and they vote the leadership out. But before it hits the urban markets, the economic shockwave obliterates the farmers first.
Right. The economics of rural farming in this region are incredibly precarious to begin with. You have families relying entirely on one season of a cash crop, like cotton, and one season of a subsistence crop, like beans or lentils, to feed their children and pay off their seed debts.
So they have zero margin for error.
Zero. When the 45-degree heat kills the cotton saplings and the subsequent drought weakens the bean crop, allowing pests to destroy it, the farmer's entire annual income evaporates.
Just gone in a month.
Exactly. They immediately default on their bank loans and are forced to turn to informal, predatory moneylenders who charge astronomical, unpayable interest rates.
And the human toll of this agricultural and economic failure is horrific. The sources mention that in just a 4-month period, in the single western state of Maharashtra, 869 farmers committed suicide.
It's devastating.
That averages out to 7 human beings every single day walking out into their dead, withered fields and ending their lives because the weather destroyed their ability to survive and pushed them into insurmountable debt.
It is a profound tragedy at the intersection of climate extremes, fragile economics, and a total lack of infrastructural resilience. But while the rural districts are turning to dust, the urban centers are actively exacerbating the climate crisis in their desperate daily attempts to survive.
Right. Let's examine the city's direct contribution to the heat dome. Let's talk about the Ghazipur landfill in Delhi.
Oh, this is wild.
The scale of this is just hard to wrap your head around. The sources describe a mountain of garbage that is 65 meters high.
65 meters.
That is significantly taller than a 20-story commercial building. It holds roughly 28 million tons of compressed municipal waste.
And it's just sitting out there.
Right. Under 45 to 50-degree ambient heat, this colossal mountain of trash is actively fermenting. It is baking in the relentless sun, decomposing and emitting massive unregulated quantities of methane and carbon dioxide directly into the atmosphere.
And those passive emissions from the rotting trash are only a fraction of the problem. The active human survival tactics create a phenomenon atmospheric scientists call the brown cloud effect.
This is a crucial mechanism to understand because the sources point out that the very things people are doing to survive the day are actually cooking them faster in the long run.
Exactly.
How does this brown cloud work?
It stems from a lack of reliable, clean infrastructure. When you have no organized waste management, you burn the trash to reduce the volume.
Makes sense.
When you have no reliable electricity or natural gas for cooking, you burn whatever biomass is available. Across the countryside, people rely on dried cow dung as a primary cooking fuel.
Right.
And after the harvest, farmers burn the remaining crop stubble to quickly clear their fields for the next planting season because they can't afford mechanized clearing.
So it's fire everywhere.
Yes. The result of millions of simultaneous small fires is a staggering amount of smoke and soot rising into the air, creating a thick, dark, continent-spanning blanket over the region.
The air quality indices the sources cite are basically apocalyptic. We're talking about PM 2.5 levels. The microscopic particulate matter that penetrates deep into your lungs and bloodstream, frequently soaring over 500.
Which is insane.
Right. To contextualize that, the World Health Organization's safe exposure limit is 15.
15.
The air is routinely 30 times more polluted than the absolute maximum safe limit.
But the brown cloud is far more than a respiratory hazard, too. It acts as a massive thermal amplifier.
How so?
All of that thick, dark particulate matter hovering in the lower atmosphere acts like millions of tiny black sponges for solar radiation.
Okay.
Instead of the sunlight hitting the Earth and reflecting back into space, these dark smoke particles absorb the photons, heat up, and re-radiate that thermal energy as infrared heat directly into the ambient air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the fires people are lighting just to boil water or cook their dinner are literally measurably raising the ambient temperature of the exact air they are struggling to breathe. It is yet another perfect, terrifying thermodynamic feedback loop.
Let's step back and look at the whole board here.
Okay.
You have a massive geographical basin that acts like a one-way mirror for heat. You have an atmospheric high-pressure dome crushing that heat down. You have wet bulb temperatures crossing the 35-degree line, where human proteins literally denature and organs fail.
Right.
The copper wires of the power grid are melting from the resistance. The municipal water pumps are dead, and the rivers are toxic foam. The crops are withered, and the sky is a thick brown blanket of heat-trapping smoke.
It's the absolute limit.
When an entire civilization is pushed to this absolute biological, structural, and environmental limit, what do human beings do?
They do the only rational thing left to do. They abandon the land, they move.
Which brings us to the most geopolitical aspect of our sources today, the Great Migration. Because people do not just sit quietly in a 48-degree tin box and wait for their organs to shut down.
No, survival instinct kicks in.
Exactly. They look for water, they look for reliable power, they look for survivable temperatures, and they start walking.
And the scale of the displacement we are looking at is genuinely difficult to comprehend. We are entering the realm of macro demographic shifts.
I want to really sit with the massive statistics the sources lay out because they are breathtaking. In the single year of 2024, 5.4 million people in India were displaced directly due to climate disasters.
5.4 million in 1 year.
If we expand the lens to the 3-year window from 2023 to 2025, 17.9 million Indians have permanently left their homes. We aren't talking about seasonal agricultural workers migrating to the city for the winter and going back.
No.
We're talking about families who lock their doors, abandon their land, and will never, ever return.
To truly contextualize a number like 17.9 million, think about the largest, most densely packed urban agglomerations on the planet. That number is roughly equivalent to the entire population of Tokyo and the entire population of Seoul combined.
Wow.
Imagine every single man, woman, and child in both of those massive global megacities packing a bag and hitting the road simultaneously with nowhere specific to go.
I can't even picture it.
The logistics of moving that many human beings without a functioning water or food grid are apocalyptic.
The sources point out a startling global metric, too. Currently, 30% of all climate refugees globally hold an Indian passport.
Nearly a third.
Nearly 1 out of every 3 people on planet Earth forced to abandon their home because of the changing climate is fleeing from this single geographical region.
To grasp the sheer geopolitical threat this level of mass migration poses, the source material draws a very direct historical comparison.
The Syrian crisis.
Yes.
Right.
Look back to 2015 and the Syrian refugee crisis. You had a brutal civil war that was severely compounded by a historic drought, which decimated the agricultural sector.
Right. People couldn't farm, so they had to leave.
This led to roughly 1 million refugees fleeing across borders, navigating through Turkey and seeking asylum in Europe.
Just 1 million people.
Just over 1 million. But those 1 million desperate people fundamentally destabilized the political and social consensus of the entire European Union.
Yeah, they really did.
The economic strain and logistical nightmare of processing, housing, and attempting to integrate those refugees cost billions of euros. It stoked deep nationalist anxieties, directly fueling the rapid rise of far-right, anti-immigrant political parties across France, Italy, Hungary, and Germany.
It changed everything.
It was arguably the primary driving catalyst for the Brexit vote that fractured the EU and pulled the United Kingdom out of the bloc. 1 million people moving across borders redrew the political map of an entire continent.
So the question the sources pose to military and political strategists is incredibly dark but mathematically necessary. If the movement of 1 million Syrian refugees fracture the political stability of Europe, what happens when a climate migration is 10 or 20 times larger?
Exactly.
What happens when 17.9 million people with tens of millions more behind them start moving en masse? Where exactly do they go?
This is where we have to look at the map of the subcontinent again and use a grim process of elimination. The urban centers within India are already bursting at the seams. The megacity slums simply cannot absorb millions more without collapsing entirely.
Right. So they have to look outward.
So the displaced populations look outward toward the national borders. They cannot go south because that is the Indian Ocean.
Obviously.
They cannot go west because Pakistan is trapped under the exact same high-pressure heat dome, recording temperatures that are just as lethal with a grid that is equally fragile.
What about the east? Towards Bangladesh?
Moving east is moving from the fire into the flood. Bangladesh is in the middle of its own distinct catastrophic climate crisis.
Flooding.
Yes, the geography is incredibly low-lying, and sea levels are rapidly rising, pushing lethal saltwater deep into the freshwater deltas and ruining the farmlands. The sources cite a World Bank report projecting that Bangladesh itself will produce 13 million of its own internal climate refugees by 2050 as the coast is swallowed.
So they have zero capacity to take in millions of Indian migrants.
None.
So south is an ocean. West is a furnace. East is sinking under salt water. The only path of least resistance is north.
Exactly. The migration naturally flows north towards the Himalayas, and right beyond that mountain range is China.
Now, historically, if you were a refugee on the Ganges Plain, you didn't look north. The Himalayas are a 6,000-meter-high wall of jagged rock, deep snow, and deadly ice. It was an insurmountable physical barrier.
To millennia.
But the climate crisis isn't just raising the temperature. It is actively changing the physical map of the Earth.
Right. The Himalayan mountain range, historically referred to as the air conditioner of Asia, is fundamentally breaking down. The sources provide alarming monitoring data showing that the massive Himalayan glaciers have shrunk by nearly 40% in just the last 40 years.
A 40% loss of total ice mass in 4 decades.
It is a staggering geological shift. Mountain springs that have flowed for millennia are drying up. Deep glacial lakes are swelling dangerously with meltwater, threatening massive downstream flash floods.
But the passes are the real issue.
Yes, from a strategic and migratory perspective, the most critical change is happening to the high-altitude mountain passes. Routes that used to be buried under meters of snow and frozen solid, completely impassable year-round, without elite mountaineering equipment, are rapidly felting out.
So people can just walk.
The sources indicate that many of these strategic passes are now totally clear of ice and accessible to pedestrians for 4 to 5 full months out of the year. You don't need ice axes or oxygen tanks to cross them anymore. If you have the endurance to walk, you can get through the wall.
And to illustrate the sheer, primal desperation driving this movement toward the mountains, the sources share a chilling visual from the state of Jharkhand.
This story is haunting.
Local villagers discovered an abandoned, dried-out brick irrigation well. But deep down at the absolute bottom of this well, there was the faintest smell of residual moisture in the mud.
Just a smell.
A troop of 40 wild monkeys, driven entirely mad by the extreme heat and thirst, threw themselves down into this deep, sheer-walled well just to get their hands on that damp earth. They couldn't climb back out, and all 40 of them died of dehydration at the bottom.
It's awful.
The sources use this macabre event to make a very specific, grim point. Human beings experiencing 50-degree heat are just as biologically desperate as those monkeys. The difference is, humans possess maps.
They know it's north.
Exactly. They know that on the other side of those melting mountain passes, there is water, there is power, and there is functioning infrastructure.
This introduces the core geopolitical comparison presented in our source documents. And we're going to impartially report what the analysis says here. When millions of climate refugees look north across those melting borders, what exactly are they looking at?
Right. Looking at the comparative infrastructure analysis in the source material, there is a stark mathematically quantified contrast in how the power and water grids of India and China have been engineered for climate resilience.
Yes.
Let's examine how the source material contrasts the engineering of these two bordering nations. What does the analysis say about the Chinese infrastructure sitting just north of the Himalayas?
Well, the analysis highlights several massive state-directed engineering projects specifically designed for extreme resilience. First, let's contrast the electrical grid.
Okay.
We noted the crippling 22.7% transmission loss south of the border due to degraded copper lines and heat resistance.
Right, losing almost a quarter of the power.
The sources emphasize China's massive deployment of ultra-high voltage, or UHV, transmission technology. UHV lines operate at incredibly high voltages, sometimes over 1 million volts, which drastically reduces the current and therefore drastically reduces the heat and electrical resistance in the wire.
So they don't lose the power to heat.
Right. This allows power generated by massive solar farms in the western deserts of Xinjiang or the massive hydroelectric dams in Sichuan to be transported thousands of kilometers east to the coastal megacities with a transmission loss of less than 5%.
So they are retaining over 95% of the power generated, delivering it exactly where the demand is spiking, regardless of the distance.
According to the engineering analysis in the text, yes.
And what about water?
Second, we look at water management. While the groundwater tables in India are depleted and reservoirs are running dry, the sources point to China's south-to-north water diversion project.
I've heard of this.
It's a multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar terraforming feat. It's designed to pump billions of cubic meters of fresh water from the flood-prone Yangtze River basin in the south, through thousands of kilometers of canals and tunnels, directly into the arid, populous northern regions.
It essentially creates a massive, engineered strategic reserve of water.
Exactly.
The document also compares the actual crisis response times, right? Like, how quickly do these respective grids bounce back when they do inevitably fail?
Yes, the text draws a very specific historical comparison here. It contrasts India's infamous 2012 grid collapse, where over 600 million people lost power simultaneously, and local authorities in some states took over 3 full days to restore basic electricity. The document contrasts this with China's severe southern blizzards in 2008. The sources state that during that catastrophic snowstorm, which physically crushed transmission towers under the weight of ice, the main lines of the Hunan province power grid were completely restored and functional within 72 hours, despite the ongoing extreme weather conditions.
So, taking this comparative analysis from the source material, you are looking at a deeply volatile strategic scenario.
Highly volatile.
South of the melting mountains, you have a population of 1.4 billion facing lethal wet bulb temperatures, a melting power grid, and dried-up rivers. Just north of those mountains, accessible via newly thawed passes, you have a deeply redundant, highly resilient grid with engineered water reserves.
And the geopolitical implications are massive. How does a nation defend a mountainous border against tens of millions of climate refugees?
The sources make it explicitly clear. Traditional military deterrence is useless.
Completely useless.
You cannot fire artillery or launch missiles at endless columns of starving, dehydrated families looking for a drink of water. The international community would instantly turn on you, the economic sanctions would be devastating, and fundamentally, shooting people doesn't lower the ambient temperature or solve the root cause of the migration.
Exactly. The source documents outlined 4 proposed strategic solutions for handling this impending historic mass migration. And as you noted, what is fascinating is how entirely non-military they are. They are exercises in extreme civil engineering and diplomatic leverage.
I was reading through these proposed solutions, and what struck me is how they treat migration less like an invading army and more like a massive weather front.
That's a great way to put it.
What is the first strategy they propose?
Number 1. Deepening infrastructure redundancy at the borders. The military isn't building more concrete pillboxes or gun emplacements. Instead, the strategy dictates vastly expanding the capacity of the civilian water, power, and communication grids hundreds of kilometers inland from the southern border in regions like Tibet and Yunnan.
Ooh, to prepare for the surge.
Exactly. The calculus is that if millions of refugees do pour over the passes, the sudden, massive spike in local resource demand doesn't instantly crash the host region's grid. They are actively building a massive infrastructural shock absorber to handle the influx without triggering a secondary collapse.
So massive redundancy to absorb the impact. I saw the second strategy involves satellite tech, but not for targeting.
Right. Number 2 is the deployment of early warning systems. The text details utilizing China's proprietary Beidou satellite navigation network, integrating high-resolution remote sensing, and applying advanced AI image recognition to constantly monitor the geography south of the border.
But not for tracking troops.
No, they aren't tracking troop movements or tanks. The AI is programmed to monitor the rate of glacial melt, track the dropping water levels in Indian reservoirs, and identify abnormal macro-level population movements funneling into the mountain valleys.
So they can see the wave coming.
Yes. By aggregating this environmental and demographic data, they could theoretically predict a massive refugee surge months before the crowds ever reach the high-altitude passes, allowing the border provinces ample time to stockpile resources and prepare logistics.
It's treating human desperation as a highly predictable algorithm. If water drops below X, expect Y million people to move north.
Precisely.
The third point seems to be a major play on the global stage.
Yes. Number 3, redefining climate refugees under international law. The sources argue forcefully that this impending migration cannot be framed merely as a localized regional humanitarian crisis between two Asian neighbors.
Okay, so how do they frame it?
The strategy is to utilize the United Nations to officially redefine climate displacement as a global security issue.
Okay.
The goal is to legally demand that the nations historically responsible for the vast majority of legacy greenhouse gas emissions, primarily the industrialized Western nations, must bear the immense financial and logistical burden of feeding, housing, and resettling these refugees.
So basically making the West pay for it.
It is a calculated diplomatic maneuver to force the international community to foot the bill for the physical fallout of global warming, legally preventing the host nation from absorbing the economic shock alone.
It's an incredible diplomatic pressure tactic.
Yeah.
You burn the coal for a century, you pay for the resettlement camps.
Exactly.
But the fourth solution was the one that really stopped me in my tracks. Because given the historically tense, occasionally violent border disputes between these two nations, this proposal seems completely counterintuitive.
Number 4 is summarized as cooling India down.
Upgrading the infrastructure of a strategic rival. Explain the logic behind this, because it's fascinating.
It is framed entirely devoid of charity. It is an act of brutal, pragmatic self-preservation.
Right.
The underlying logic is simple. The hotter the Indian subcontinent gets, the more their internal power grid fails. The more the grid fails, the more the water pumps stop.
And then they move north.
Yes. The more the water stops, the more millions of desperate refugees are forced to head north toward the Chinese border. Therefore, the absolute cheapest, safest, and most effective border defense strategy is to fix India's grid so the population never has a reason to flee in the first place.
Wow.
The sources propose that China should aggressively export its advanced solar panel manufacturing, its proprietary desert agriculture techniques, and specifically its ultra-high voltage transmission technology directly to northern India.
So help them build resilience.
Exactly. If you can help your neighbor build a highly resilient, functioning water and power grid that withstands 50-degree heat, you eliminate the catalyst for the entire migration. As the text implies, it is infinitely cheaper to build a high-voltage power line in New Delhi than it is to process, house, and feed 10 million starving refugees at the border in Tibet.
That is a phenomenal geopolitical pivot. The ultimate realization that in the era of extreme climate change, your best national defense is actively ensuring your neighbor's air conditioning stays on.
That's it exactly.
That brings us to the summary of the major takeaways from this deep dive. Because what the sources have made abundantly clear today is that extreme heat is no longer just a bad week of weather.
No, it's not.
It is the ultimate, uncompromising stress test for the viability of human civilization. We've explored how a geographical steamer pot traps a high-pressure heat dome, compounding the temperature.
Right.
We've seen how that dome pushes the wet bulb temperature past the 35-degree physical red line, where the thermodynamic laws of evaporation fail and human proteins literally begin to denature.
The biological limit.
Yes. We've traced the physics of how that heat increases electrical resistance, melting the copper lifelines of the grid, crashing the water pumps, killing the crops, and filling the sky with a toxic, heat-trapping brown cloud.
The infrastructure death spiral.
And finally, we've looked at the geopolitical earthquake this triggers, how the failure of those grids forces tens of millions of people to abandon their ancestral homes and march toward a melting mountain border, fundamentally altering the strategic balance of the entire continent.
It is absolutely vital to place this incredibly modern crisis into a broader historical context, too, because civilizations rarely vanish overnight in a cinematic flash of fire.
They rot slowly.
They rot slowly from the roots up. If you look at the gradual fall of the Roman Empire, it was not defeated in a single glorious battlefield maneuver. It was ground down over centuries by relentless mass migrations.
There's constant pressure.
Exactly. Germanic tribes, fleeing deteriorating colder climates and failing crops in the north, continually pushed into Roman territories seeking arable land. They were, in essence, ancient climate refugees overwhelming the empire's infrastructure.
That's a fascinating comparison.
Similarly, the Tang dynasty in China, which is widely considered one of the most prosperous, culturally rich eras in human history, was fatally undermined by severe, prolonged droughts.
So is the weather again.
Yes. The lack of water led to systemic agricultural failure, which led to subsequent massive locust swarms, which finally pushed the starving agrarian population into open, empire-ending rebellion. Civilizations fall silently and inevitably when their underlying foundational infrastructure, Their basic ability to hydrate and cool their people gives way.
And that is exactly what I want you, the listener, to think about today as you go about your routine. Look at your own city's infrastructure.
Let's take a hard look at it.
Because when the weather is mild, it is incredibly easy to take the hum of the refrigerator or the flow of the kitchen tap completely for granted. But when your local grid is truly tested, when an unprecedented heat dome settles over your region or a historic 100-year blizzard freezes the power plants, will the water keep flowing? Will the copper wires hold up?
It's the ultimate test.
The true lasting measure of a modern nation's power isn't the size of its standing army, the sophistication of its fighter jets, or the number of missiles hidden in its silos. It is whether it possesses the deep, redundant, heavily engineered civil infrastructure required to keep its population cool, watered, and biologically alive during a catastrophic climate event.
Right.
The margin between a functioning, polite society and a desperate, chaotic exodus is far thinner than we like to admit. It relies entirely on a web of aging wires, buried pipes, and the fragile hope that the weather doesn't push the physics of those materials past their breaking point.
It's a sobering thought.
So I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over, one that builds on the incredible geographic shifts we've unpacked today. For millennia, the Himalayas have stood as the absolute insurmountable roof of the world, a massive, lethal wall of ice and stone that has effectively kept entirely different empires, cultures, and populations separated for all of recorded human history.
It was treated as a fixed, unchanging reality of geography.
But what does the geopolitical map of the world look like tomorrow, when the heat dome finally melts the ice and the roof of the world becomes a wide-open highway for tens of millions of desperate people?
It changes everything.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.